Welcome, everybody. My name is John, and I organize this group, Sit Heads Meditation Club. So Sit Heads is a sitting and social group for people interested in deep meditation practice. I sometimes like to refer to us as a serious meditation group for non-serious people. So now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce and welcome Dr. Rick Hanson. Dr. Hanson is a neuropsychologist, a meditation teacher who has been practicing since 1974, I believe, and the New York Times bestselling author. I think the author of 6 books, maybe notably for this particular group, Buddha's Brain, and his most recent Neurodharma, both of which focus on the intersection of brain science and sort of brain-based explorations of, explanations of the things that we encounter in the course of contemplative practice. And so we'll be talking about some of that stuff today. So after I have we'll do a short chat, and then we will open the floor for Q&A. Rick, do you have anything that you want to say before we get started?
Really just an honor to be here and to feel among Kalyanamita, the Pali term for spiritual friends, just collaborators really in contemplative practice in the modern world, and maybe to introduce a potentially provocative topic among others. If you reflect on the history of Buddhism, it's sometimes often said that there are multiple vehicles. The Theravadan tradition, in which the Buddha initially taught, evolving through Tibet, second major vehicle, and then Chan and Zen, a third vehicle, arguably, I think, importantly, acknowledging Pure Land forms of Buddhism as a kind of fourth vehicle. And I think actually we're in the early days of a fifth vehicle emerging in the West as Buddhism flows into the West with some very historically unprecedented features, such as a number of lay practitioners like us all who have a deep interest in deep contemplative practice. That's unusual, as well as other changes that have developed as Buddhism has come into the West in our current time. Maybe we could talk more about that as well, including, for example, the intersection between Buddhism and modern science, including biology, neurobiology, neuropsychology, and psychology. Anyway, so it's in that larger frame that I get hyper jazzed about doing this. Also, I think a number of you are probably on the East Coast. I'm a longtime California guy, so I feel like I really need to kind of represent the West Coast here a little bit, because we're sometimes known as slackers, even if we're not on Slack. So I feel like, especially with someone as bright as John, bright in many, many kinds of ways, I want to definitely rise to the occasion. So I'm glad to be here.
Oh, stop. You make me blush. But no, that's great, Rick. Thank you so much for being here. I don't think anyone looking at your CV and background would mistake you for a slacker. So I think there's very little danger there. Don't worry. So now let's just chat. And I thought we could try and do this as not really a sort of two-person Q&A where I sort of feed questions to you and then you answer them, but please feel free to sort of push back on what I say or suggest another avenue that this might go in, or, I'd like it to be, let's see if we can have sort of a dialogue. Obviously, I think folks are more interested, and certainly I'm more interested in what you have to say than what I have to say, but we can sort of let it evolve organically. Does that sound all right?
Sure, definitely.
So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about, the obvious place to start is the place where you have in some ways planted your flag, right? Which is this intersection of ancient contemplative practice, especially Buddhist practice, and brain science and these new insights that we're getting from psychology, neuroscience, cognitive science, maybe even consciousness studies, one could argue. So there's one obvious benefit, or a benefit that's obvious to me, reading your books, and also talking with other folks. We've had Dr. Sarah Lazar with us, which was super interesting. But one obvious benefit to me is how it demystifies the practice, right? And so if there are folks who are allergic to quote unquote spiritual talk or spiritual language, if you talk to them in terms of, the anterior cingulate cortex or whatever, suddenly they're listening, right? I feel like I could take Buddha's Brain, your book, and give it to my sort of skeptical materialist uncle. He might actually read that, and he might actually try something in there. So to me, that's very valuable. But what I'm really interested in is, how will this stuff change how we practice?
Right.
To what extent is this stuff not just explanatory and descriptive, but prescriptive, right? So I'm really curious to hear how you think these things, let's say right now, based on what we already know, and then maybe in the future down the line, being a little more speculative, how might this change our practice? And sort of one way that I like to think about it is, what practice advice were Suzuki Roshi, were Dipa Ma, Toku Urgyen Rinpoche, the Buddha, what practice advice were these masters not able to give us because the knowledge of this brain science, this wasn't yet available, right? What has been opened up in terms of practice for us? How might we practice differently? What do you think about that?
I think you're asking a great question. And for me, the framework is, in effect, we can know ourselves in two ways, from the inside out, subjectively, which is all that was available to the Buddha and his contemporaries, and all that was available to anyone really throughout the world, including in many of the world's traditions, including First People traditions, indigenous traditions, which I think are very important to acknowledge as having a deep, 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 deep contemplative lineage and a lot of wisdom there. And also certainly secular scientific traditions or philosophical traditions. We could only know ourselves subjectively from the first person perspective. But with the advent of science, and especially in the last 100 or so years, we can increasingly know ourselves objectively from the outside in with a third person perspective. And to me, a way of answering or asking your question, maybe saying it slightly differently, or what are the potential benefits in being able to toggle back and forth between those two perspectives while appreciating and steering clear of pitfalls in standing entirely and only in one or the other. One benefit, I think, and also to be clear, the Buddha and thousands, perhaps millions of other people around the world have not needed an MRI to awaken. Or certainly millions and millions of people have not needed this kind of information to progress very far along their own path of practice. And for myself, that's what's really central for me, a kind of a sacred process that's mysterious and deep, and in my own view, extends into ultimate kinds of unconditionality that are meaningfully distinct from the natural frame of the ordinary Big Bang universe. That's a whole big topic. Inside the natural frame, I can name, I think, a number of ways in which that I'll call it a neurodharma perspective, if I may be so bold.
I think you earned it.
Can enhance practice. It's not needed to, Buddhism doesn't need to be made better, I think, fundamentally. But what are some of the enhancements? So one, individualizing practice, understanding, for example, that there are natural variations and the ability to focus attention and the capacity, literally biologically, having to do with different genetically rooted patterns of generating receptors for dopamine in synapses. Certain people are dopamine hungry, they're stimulation hungry. They need more stim to remain focused. And they're not bad yogis, they're not bad meditators, they're not unmotivated, they're not afflicted with the kleshas. They're just more toward the spirited end of the temperamental spectrum. Like really understanding that and naturalizing that and normalizing it, and then adapting skillful means to that purpose. Now, I think clearly skillful teachers do adapt their approaches. They do recognize that there are different kinds of meditators, different kind of yogis. On the other hand, I think there's a certain amount of shaming that's gone on, in the ways in which, if you think about the temperamental spectrum with, careful, cautious, anxious turtles at one end of the spectrum, and then kind of stimulation seeking, impulsive, active, excitable jackrabbits at the other end of the spectrum. Most meditation centers have been built by turtles for turtles to make them better turtles. But what do you do if you're more of a jackrabbity biology? It's not your fault. How do you adapt that? So I think that's one thing that's been actually really helpful, normalizing and understanding more deeply various underlying physiologically rooted processes that actually affect how people can practice. Okay, that's one. A second is that among the 10,000 tools, I mean, you think about just, let's say, Buddhism, let alone adding Sufism, Jewish contemplative practice, just in Buddhism, it's like a warehouse of 10,000 tools. Which ones? Which ones? And then you have abbots within a very tight monastic tradition in a small region of Thailand arguing intensely with each other about what constitutes jhana practice. Right? What is stream entry? What does it really mean to be mindful? What's the role of metta and karuna, loving kindness and compassion in our practice? They really differ. Well, one of the nice things about understanding more about our biology is that it helps you foreground and prioritize and dust off methods, for example, that are, not invented by neurodharma, but can be appreciated and prioritized. And I want to give one example of that, which has to do with something that's been central to me in my own practice in the last 10 or so years, a real appreciation for the evolutionary biological basis of craving. To really appreciate that craving is a biological drive state based on some, penetrating, compelling sense of deficit or disturbance in the meeting of a key need. It's when we feel our needs are not met in our belly and bones that we move into craving. Well, that immediately takes us to opportunities to, number one, find ways to skillfully meet our needs. Right there, defueling craving in a gross sense. And second, again and again and again, internalize the felt sense of needs met enough in the moment. There's enough safety, three major needs as a structure. There's enough safety in the moment, in the present. There's enough satisfaction in the present. There's enough connection in the present. So you can get out of the war inside your own head. You can disengage from the pressure, the straining, the striving, if only for that moment in the present. And through emotional processes of memory, as you repeatedly internalize the felt sense of needs met enough, you build up an increasingly unconditional core of peacefulness, contentment, and love in terms of those three broad needs in the marrow of your being, which is not full awakening. It's not itself the third noble truth of nirodha cessation, but it really is helpful in a very embodied way, for example. And I'll give you one more, then I'll kick it back to you maybe. Highlighting, I'll tell you another highlight is, if you think about it, practice, in my view, is a process, it's a progressive process. Now, that progressive process includes sudden awakening. And that progressive process includes clearing away what is obscured, the beautiful truth that was always already present. But even that process of clearing away the obscurations, as they put it in Tibet, is progressive. So it's a process broadly of learning. And one of my, streams is developmental psychology. I mean, I did my dissertation on 15-month-olds. I'm very grounded in developmental psychology, and to really appreciate it, we develop, we grow, we release, and we relinquish, and we cultivate. Okay, well, how does that occur actually in the body and brain? How does learning happen? Well, with modern neuroscience, especially the last 10, 20 years or so, it's increasingly clear first that the brain is biased negatively. Mm-hmm. It overlearns from painful, stressful, suffering type experiences, and it underlearns. The brain is relatively inept at converting states to traits, positive states to positive traits efficiently and rapidly. if what we want to do in this developmental progressive process of awakening is cultivate and stabilize and establish positive traits of various kinds, traits of mindfulness, traits of concentration capability, traits of penetrating insight that is active in us, not just a memory of some experience we had on retreat 10 years ago. Okay. If we were to cultivate traits, that takes us immediately into the how of how the brain changes for the better. And as you know, in my material on this, particularly in hardwiring happiness, it's a two-step process. It's a fairly straightforward process that moves from state to trait, from experiencing to learning in the broadest sense. But people routinely forget the second step of internalization. It's easy to have experiences on the cushion or while listening to the Dharma talk or when hanging out in your local Sangha, but how to have those experiences leave lasting physical traces behind in changes of neural structure and function. There, modern science, and my own work in that area, I think has a lot to offer at helping us steepen our growth curve based on the experiences we're having, so that we actually get more out of our time in formal practice and in informal everyday life as well. So those are, I will just say that, I'll just pause right there. Well, I got to say one more that I think is just super cool. Okay.
Go for it. Look, my only job is to just keep you talking, right? That's why
Oh,
I'm
okay.
here.
I don't
So
mean to rattle on
go.
too much, but I could just go. I love this stuff. I have to shut up, but that said, I will say one more that it just, to me, is great around vipassana, insight. It's like part A and part B. In other words, like you said at the beginning, John, when you realize that apart from whatever is meaningfully distinct from the ordinary natural Big Bang universe, other than that, it is the meat that is continually enabling the mind. It's a necessary basis for the aggregates, for raw sense experience, for perception, memory, for the feeling tones, the Vedanas, the hedonic tones of experiences, for all the other mental activities, thoughts, feelings, hopes, dreams, sorrows. As Sherrington put it, Charles Sherrington, a century ago, the brain is an enchanted loom, as it were, continually weaving the fabric of consciousness, not in a completely reductionistic way, because the contents of consciousness are intangible. They're grounded fundamentally in flows of information represented by a tangible physical neural substrate. And those flows of information have causal power of their own, even as they enlist underlying physical activities for their representation. And there's a lot of fact and philosophy packed into those few sentences right there, But so I'm not saying that the mind reduces to the meat, but the mind needs the meat in order to unfold, right? So when you get that takes you into disenchantment. It can support disenchantment in a good sense, nibbida, the factor of kind of realizing, or to put it a little more modernly, meh, this thought, this pleasure, meh, you start to realize, oh, wow, it's the meat. It's the meat. You start taking yourself much less seriously. And it takes you also to anatta. You recognize, obviously, well, this body clearly arises dependently, on so many things. Stop inhaling and you'll realize really quickly how dependent you are on the exhalations of green growing things. So there's that part. But then more subtly, when you begin to know from the third person perspective, outside in, objectively, that as your mind quiets, the arising over a time course of, quarter seconds, the arising of the next thought or view or sensation or reaction to something or other, the persisting of it for a few seconds and then the, shifting into being something else, right? That all of that, even just what feels almost like a background hum of consciousness in the wallpaper of your mind, when you start recognizing that all of that is based on really fast neural activity distributed in the neural substrates of memory involving trillions, probably, certainly billions. There's several hundred trillion synapses inside your head. So in the neural substrates of consciousness, certainly billions of synapses wiggling and shifting and dynamically changing, ebbs and flows of metabolic activity. When you start realizing that, what seems so precious, this moment of feeling like me, or whatever it is that we're thinking about that seems so important and weighty in the moment, is actually simply being constructed in a very ephemeral and contingent way by these underlying neurobiological processes. It's a lot easier to take it less seriously, and it's a lot easier to claim it so possessively as me and mine. And therefore, that kind of understanding of what's going on behind the curtain, to produce the movie on the screen, can help you lighten up about the movie and guide it, sure, have compassion for it, sure, but not take it so personally.
It sounds like a clarifying of right view, or another dimension of right view, in a sense, right? The way in which intellectual understanding can influence how we practice, right? I mean, that's just what you were mentioning at the end there. Thinking about, in Buddhism, they would use all sorts of metaphors, thought experiments, sort of logical twists and turns, quadrilemmas, and so forth, right? To use the mind to actually get you to use the discursive mind to get you somewhere below that, deeper. And it sounds like what you're saying is that, in part, what you're saying is that our new understanding about the brain may add some new chapters, right? We may add a few volumes to that library of productive, discursive explorations of discursive, not said disparagingly, explorations into skillful view and skillful understanding.
I think that's true. And of the four that I just riffed off the top of my head, it's the least important.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could just underline it, as a guy who came to practice very much in his head, and I've needed to really do what Samuel Bonder calls waking down, not just waking up. For example, the first thing I was talking about, individualizing practice and
different neurotypes.
And honoring, grounded in really 300,000 years of our species, anatomically modern humans walking around, grounded in another several million years of evolution as tool-making hominids, also living as hunter-gatherers, kind of in that sense, when you realize that you feel it in your body, it's okay to be me. You are a natural version of yourself. You're right. It's okay. You can feel it. There's a letting go in your body when you can accept your own physiological, temperamental, constitutional nature. You feel it in your body. Or the second thing I was talking about, learning, when something lands and you can slow it down to receive it into yourself and to feel it reverberate, and you're not clinging to it, you're just simply remaining present with it as it reverberates within you. I like that, patana means establishing, satipatthana, establishing. And there's an establishing of this new way of being, this new insight, a little calmer, a little lighter, a little more grateful, a little more loving, a little freer, right? It's very bodily. That's the learning part. And then the third thing about really feeling that a need is met enough in the moment that the craving can relax. The root of the word in Pali for craving is thirst, tanha, thirst, something missing, a deficit, thirst. And you really feel that, oh, I'm basically all right now for safety. Oh, there's enough already for contentment. It's okay to keep dreaming big dreams and taking care of issues. There's no contradiction with engaged Buddhism and social action and accepting whatever's flowing through your mind. But in the core of your being, you feel it. Oh, I don't need to keep grasping, right? With regard to safety, I don't need to keep hating. And I think there's arguably a fourth hedonic tone that's evolving, a fourth Vedana, the sense of relationality, relatedness. It's not about liking or disliking or indifference, neutrality. It's about feeling that one is resting in a felt sense of relatedness as an indicator of the need for connection. So there too, when we feel liked enough and loved enough already, be nice to have more, but there's an enoughness of it. And we feel good and worthy in and of ourselves. We don't need to activate or engage in the social emotions of shame and inadequacy. Oh, that too, that enables the craving to diminish. That too is really, really very embodied. So as cool as these ideas are, and I'm with you in a shared, about them, at the end of the day, I think the impact is very embodied.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that clarification. I mean, I will say that the first one you mentioned really struck a chord with me as someone with ADHD, who often does feel like the sort of jackrabbit type hanging out in Burmese monasteries.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a mismatch.
Yeah.
But so it's encouraging. It's exciting to consider the idea that the sort of craft of matching the meditator to the style of practice may continue to evolve and may experience quantum leaps in its efficacy due to the science that's emerging. I think that's super interesting. I mean, they definitely they definitely did that, right? If you read in, the Vishuddhimagga, they talk about, if you're prone to this sort of affliction, meditate like this. If you're prone to this, do that. And there does seem really to be something there, but the idea that we could take that so much further, I think would be of enormous value to folks like me who do often feel like whatever the template was that they were envisioning when they crafted this course of practice, you feel a little to the left or a little to the right of that mean. And so that's very exciting. That's very exciting. So why don't we wrap it there? That was super interesting. And I don't want to stand between folks and their questions and you. So why don't we move to the Q&A portion where we can hear what other people would like to ask you about. All right. So someone asked a question about how to adapt or think differently about meditation for people who suffer from low alertness on the spectrum. Let me ask, person, do you want me to ask that question or would you like to ask it in case there was a lack of clarity? I'll give you a second to respond. And in the meantime, I will go to Morgan, who would like to ask a question herself. So Morgan, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much for joining. I'm actually pretty new to this group. I've only been here a few times and still pretty new to meditation and Buddhism, and I'm just here for curiosity. So I would like to ask you about craving when it applies to people with depression, because when I think of depression, it can create a lack of craving in a way. And I was curious how this might be different from what you mean when you say, when you're talking about craving, and if you have any information about it, what's different in the depressed brain when it's stifling craving? Thank you.
Morgan, that is such an interesting question, honestly. And I've been doing this for a while. I'm a psychologist. I've never heard that question. You're making an analogy. It's really cool, or not an analogy, but you're pointing out that what is apparently a desired condition in a Buddhist framework to be free of craving is arguably to some extent present in people that we would think of as actually suffering a lot and being in some ways dysfunctional, certainly distressed and dysfunctional in a clinical sense, even at the extreme. And that's really very, very very interesting. I'll weigh into this, and I'm just kind of thinking on my feet here because this is, to me, a really brilliant question. It's very cool. So I'm glad you're in this. There's a term called the near enemy. It's an idea, John's probably familiar with it, probably other people as well, from Southeast Asian Buddhist psychology. It's the idea, for example, that equanimity, which is considered to be a good trait to develop over time, emotional balance, so that you feel what you feel, but in the core of your being, you're retaining a resilient well-being, a basic sense of all rightness and even keeledness. You're undisturbed in your core with equanimity. It's considered to be a high value. Well, equanimity's near enemy is apathy. Apathy, such as we would find with people with depressed mood. And so we can see that they're kind of like each other, but actually many people do seek equanimity, probably in this group. I don't know how many people would seek depression. Having known people, including my family system, who've grappled with depression, certainly having had days myself when aspects of depression, such as a sense of dejection and hopelessness and worthlessness and despair and a lot of sadness, were there. I can accept those feelings, but I wouldn't particularly want to, take a pill every day that would induce them in myself, let's say. So that might be a part of a way to start to think about it. The other thing is that when I think about someone who's depressed, obviously it's on a range. So someone who's depressed, at the milder end of that, even edging into technically what's called dysthymic disorder, it's not an episode of clinical depression, but it's like a chronic sense of low mood, which I think is really quite common among people. You may have yourself perhaps some sense of what I'm talking about. In that range, a person can have positive experiences, but the more a person is moving from, let's say, dysthymic disorder to mild depression to moderate depression to severe depression, they're less and less able to have positive experiences of enjoyment or gratitude or love. And the ones that they are able to have fade more and more rapidly. And to the point that in severe depression, they can't experience anything positive at all, basically. That's not the case when someone is released of craving. Craving, in the Buddhist psychological sense, is considered to have qualities in it of contraction, something missing. There's a discontent. It can be subtle to extreme. There's often a sense of pressure and drivenness in it. Something's missing and something's wrong. As craving diminishes, people are very able to have positive experiences and to sustain them. That would be a major, major difference. The other thing I would just point out as I'm thinking about this here is that sometimes depression is described as a learning disorder. Isn't that a weird and interesting way of putting it? And what they mean by that, it's not that you can't read anymore or something like that. It's that in the range from dysthymic disorder to moderate depression, people can have beneficial experiences. They can be with a friend who is friendly and likes them. They can get something done and have a momentary sense of accomplishment, but they don't learn from that experience. It doesn't last. It doesn't shift them in some way, right? And in that sense, they're not learning from it. One of the notions about why antidepressants actually work is they promote neurogenesis in the hippocampus, a part of the brain, the birth of new baby neurons. So people become, one of the notions of why antidepressants work is that they enable people to actually learn from their positive experiences and gradually come out of, the undertow of this depressive mood, this blanket that kind of smothers any good experience. Blah. On the other hand, when people, increasingly are released of craving, they still lean toward what is wholesome and beneficial. They're just increasingly at peace with whatever happens. And they are able certainly to grow and learn from their beneficial experiences, in fact, better than ever, as these beneficial experiences of love or grit or self-worth or insight, happiness, land in a mind that is increasingly not contracted around craving, they can learn and grow faster and faster. Their growth curve becomes actually steeper as craving falls away, which is also the opposite of what it's like to be depressed. I don't know, what do you make of all that?
Thank you. I think that was really informative, and you gave me a lot to think about. I think what you were saying about, it's like the depressed brain kind of tends to forget positive associations, like what you were saying earlier, is that these imprints are less and less deep every time they occur. And so it is, in a way, kind of a learning disorder. It's sort of a memory disorder for positive experiences.
Yeah, emotional memory especially. I mean, you can recollect that, oh, they said that nice thing, or oh, that hot fudge sundae tasted really good, but you don't feel it. Yeah. Maybe just one last little thing is you're also speaking to this deep theme in I think all traditions, and certainly in Buddhism, and it's kind of a controversy. And it goes to the whole question really of engaged Buddhism, the vital importance of balancing equanimity as cravings fall away with compassion, with warming the heart, with a movement, in love to help others if one can. And both are really important. As our craving falls away, we can't, it's not just that we disengage from the world, but we also, it's important to, as Tara Brach put it to me recently in terms of my own practice, moisten the emptiness. We can cultivate us insight into the existent emptiness of all phenomena, including all experiences. And it's important to not just have that recognition, have a certain austerity and intellectualism in it, but that it has some juiciness as well. So I think you're speaking to that too.
I like that. Thank you for answering my question.
Oh yes, pleasure. Okay,
thank you so much, Morgan, and thank you, Rick. All right, Morgan, I'll bring you back down. So let's see here. So here's a question that I was asked to read. I want to just take a brief second to just note, I worry that I've misrepresented a little bit. And so I want to be quite clear in case I have misrepresented that Sitheads is not a Buddhist group. So if folks are here with a spiritual practice or a meditation or contemplative practice that is not rooted in Buddha Dharma, you are so welcome here.
Right, I can very rapidly broaden out. Thanks for the clarification, John.
But Rick, I was going to say, you have actually set an example here and done a really excellent job throughout of making sure to flag the deep wisdom available in Jewish mysticism and Sufism and so forth. And when you and I spoke, you talked about, I think, Advaita Vedanta. And so there's so many wonderful traditions. Basically, if you ever like to sit in silence sometimes and just sort of sit there, I don't care where you learned how to do that, hang out with us. So I just wanted to say that in case I didn't sort of live up to that standard and accidentally slipped into sort of Buddhist mode. My own training is Buddhist. They have good stuff. So people they have a lot of good stuff, very clearly articulated. And so a lot of Buddhists in the house, no doubt, but we're a more eclectic group than that, and we aim to be ever more eclectic. So I just wanted to make that clear and maybe correct myself, not you. All right, so I'll go ahead and hit you with this next question, Rick. The question I came here with: how to adapt or think differently about meditation for people like me who suffer from low alertness on the spectrum of conscious awareness, parentheses, lower end of functional, not vegetative, but not fully wakeful, in the deep end of ADHD, inattentive. I feel this condition has really held me back from experiencing some of the benefits of meditation. What if a person doesn't have the neurological cognitive capacity to be fully aware? And that's the end of the question. And the person said that if you need clarification, they would be willing to unmute their mic and provide it. But why don't we first see if you have thoughts on that?
Well, as Sher Khan puts it in the chat, a magnificent question. Because I don't know about, I feel like I'm on the somewhere in a spectrum too, not yet fully awake. And so I'll speak here a little bit, and I think this is where the question is asking me from a little bit of brain talk. And so if people, so to contextualize it, in almost any contemplative tradition we can imagine, or almost any form of just everyday coping in life, there's a priority placed on, there's a value placed on being able to sustain attention to things and apply attention to where it's useful to apply it and disengage it from what's not useful. That's kind of a fundamental general capability that's important. And so when we have difficulties with that, it has impact. So what are the things that get in the way of that generally useful capability, which we can truly develop over time? In other words, to be able to place our attention where we want it and keep it there. And also to pull it away from ruminations, resentments, fantasies, preoccupations, vengeful grievances, et cetera, that are not so good for us and others. In down to earth, plain English, right? So first, one of the things that gets in the way of keeping our attention on one particular thing is that people can fatigue with concentration. They just get tired. I suspect it's because neural circuits in the brain that are involved in keeping the spotlight of attention on one particular thing, whether it's the sensation of the breath at the upper lip or what your boring boss is droning on about in the afternoon in a business meeting, right? Which is tiring. And maybe because metabolically we deplete oxygen and glucose and other neurochemicals in those circuits. That's one thing. Second, and that's kind of hard to fix. That one's a tough one. Second, there could be a thing that to be able to keep our attention on a certain stimulus, it really helps if it continues to be stimulating, interesting, enjoyable, provocative. And there are many people who are kind of in a temperamental subtype that they don't have a lot of dopamine receptors. Their genetics do not express a lot of dopamine receptors, so they're not receiving a lot of little dopamine packets coming in at the docking stations where synapses come together. The upstream neuron is firing, it's releasing little vesicles, little bubbles of dopamine molecules, but there are not many docking stations on the downstream side, so the person depletes dopamine in that circuit really rapidly. That person needs more stimulation. So what you can do there is deliberately find ways to keep regenerating the sense of what you're paying attention to and interesting. So for example, if you're meditating, walk while meditating rather than sit quietly. Walking is more stimulating than sitting quietly. If you're focused on the breath, focus on the breath and your whole torso, the whole body. Focus on, let's say, objects of meditation that are more emotionally juicy, such as love or gratitude or a sense of peacefulness. If it's helpful to you to do guided meditations in which there's the ongoing stimulus of something that's being said to you, great. If you're trying to pay attention in a business meeting, keep bouncing the spotlight of your attention around to find new things to pay attention to. The color of your boss's tie, make your boss wear a funny clown suit in your mind. Just keep the stim going. So that's the second major obstacle to sustained attention. The third, and I want to be clear here, I'm not entirely certain yet that I'm really speaking to the question, but I'm working my way to a possibility here. The third is many people who are on the spirited or ADHD end of the spectrum have very porous filters between themselves and the outer world, or even themselves and the inner world. All kinds of stuff kind of bombards them and comes popping in. So then they get distracted, right? the sound out the window, something somebody else might have said, kind of a random thought or memory bubbling up from the inside, and then whoosh, they're taken away. So you see these three major sources of inattention, right? And they're really different. So for the third one, it really can help to reduce external stimuli. These are kids who do better when they're studying inside a kind of a carousel, whatever they call that little thing they're inside of. Don't try to do your homework while watching TV or listening to music. Reduce external stimuli. Meditate in quieter settings, for example. Be around other people who are also meditating, who kind of create an atmosphere, a field that is really meditative and is sending that message, and there's nothing else that's going on. And in terms of internal stimuli, it can really help to stay in touch with some ongoing body sensation that's positive and reassuring, like the feeling that there's enough breath and enoughness. Because one of the major things that bubbles up from the inside that distracts people, hijacks them, is anxiety. So deliberately, this to me is one of those things, John, to your question earlier about how does, evolutionary neuropsychology help? Well, one is to appreciate how freaking scared we are. We're scared monkeys. We are so vulnerable to anxiety in ways subtle and gross, and to really honor the power of anxiety and therefore ramp up resources for anxiety, including in a very granular real-time way while we practice, continually reassuring ourselves. It's okay. We're okay still in the present, whatever the future may hold, and it may suck. In the present, basically all right now. And so focusing on the breath, the ongoingness of the breath, heart is still beating, or maybe the breath is scary to focus on because there's a trauma history. Focus on the simple ongoing livingness of the body, ongoing beingness, still going on being, as Daniel Winnicott, great British child psychiatrist, put it, going on being, so reassuring. That, staying in touch with that, can also reduce the distracting power of things arising from within, notably anxiety. And then the last thing, and this is where I want to be sure I was speaking to the question, I may have missed it. So I've named 3 obstacles to sustained focused attention. They're grounding in the brain and things we can do about it, right? I wonder if the person is also saying that they feel that it's difficult to be, in effect, aware of their own interior. That it's hard to have a sustained sense that's wakeful and bright of just what's it like to be you in a global sense. And there, I have a couple little suggestions. One is to relax the concern around that, because unless something is really wrong neurologically, we all have that ability to be aware of ourselves inherently. And so to relax concern, which then just would distract you from you, relax that concern, and more generally, get a sense of sort of widening the field of perspective with a feeling of brightness, of brightening, which will tend to engage more norepinephrine, key neurochemical that's involved with the orienting response and could well be involved in the Tibetan practice of brightening the mind. So there's a sense of sitting up in a more upright way, which tends to mobilize the orienting response, which engages norepinephrine, which helps us be more alert. Norepinephrine is a neurochemical that says, this is important, pay attention, to be more alert. You can see I'm drawing on what I know about our neurobiology in real time here to try to speak to this question, to kind of hack the brain, in effect, in the service of the mind. And so sitting up straighter, widening awareness, even with your eyes open, extending the gaze to the horizon, and with a sense of brightening, even with like light or energy, that too will tend to help a person sustain better ongoing present moment awareness.
Well, this person would actually like to speak briefly and respond, so I'm going to go ahead and spotlight her.
Okay, good. And I'll be pretty brief myself, probably in my response to make room for other people too. Hi
Yeah.
there,
Hi, yeah.
Catherine.
Hi, I want to try to keep it short. Thank you very much. You gave me some good concrete suggestions that I think I can implement right away.
Great.
But I wonder if you can say another word. Well, maybe we don't have time, but we could come back to it, or maybe it'll come up in the context of another question about this brightening, because I've worked with this instructor and this idea, and I have chronic fatigue syndrome as well, and like I just don't seem to know how to like bootstrap that that aspect. But like, thank you. Even if we don't get to that, like, you really helped me a lot already. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah. One thing that people can often underestimate, that what might present as ADD is actually high intelligence. And, you know, a lot of thoughts, a lot of understanding, a lot of insights. It's just a quick mind. And so sometimes that's what's happening too, you know, in the mix there. And it may well, you know, intuitively, I have a sense may well be in the mix for you. And beyond that, I don't know, have you, if I may ask, and you don't have to, you know, answer, have you worked with deliberately taking, I don't know, the feeling of being cared about, the feeling of being loved, your own warm-hearted, with also your own warm-heartedness, you know, love flowing out and love flowing in, or both love. Have you ever explored that and a feeling of being supported? You know, it's like you're dealing with a lot, right? The feeling of being supported as a object of meditation, and to become absorbed in it even. Have you ever played around with that?
I don't think that I have.
Well, that might be a very interesting one because it's kind of a 2 or 3 for 1. You know, just that attention to that feeling of, to the extent it's real, you know, and the point is to maybe use people in your life or situations as the initial prompt, but then start going after the actual experience, the direct sensory, you know, emotional, somatic experience, decoupled from the prompts, you know, that initiate it. But once you start to feel it, feeling supported, that might be reassuring for you, given your health history, you know, the sense of being reassured, you know, supported, that you're okay, you're ongoing, life is supporting you, others care about you. It would also be emotionally rich and stimulating, and therefore would tend to, you know, contain attention. Weaving into it as well your own warm-heartedness, mingling with caring flowing in, your own caring flowing out, which is independent of whether or not there's much caring for you. So you always have access to your own caring flowing out. And I just also have a hunch that it's like the love in that and the faith in it, you know, the sense of being supported, even a joy would help. It would bring a brightening. It would bring an alerting to you that would help you in general, and also help you in your practice.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful, because it sounds like the difference that I would try now is to go from a more like emotional feeling angle than so much of a, like, kind of let go of the cognitive side so much.
Exactly. And part of what's good about it, what I'm talking about, it's a way of thinking about it. You are actually supported, right? Right. We are supported by the air we breathe, by the gravity that supports us. We're in a network of relatedness with other people. Even though there are parts of your body that are, let's call it, going wrong, there's so much about your body that's going right. Right. And I have a particular feeling for chronic health issues, including chronic fatigue, related to the work that my wife does, and also some of her own health issues over time. So I have a feeling it's a real deal what you're grappling with. That said, there are things that are supporting you, even if you're not aware of them. So even if your mind wanders a little while you're practicing, formally or informally, there can be this background sense that increasingly is just sort of like a background quality in your awareness that's quite emotional, sort of nonverbal and somatic, of being supported, you know, loved, carried, even in an ultimate kind of way.
Yes, you reminded me that, that these are things that I actually do feel fully aware with when I'm feeling them.
Yeah.
And that's a great place to go. Thank you.
Yeah, even if you're not foregrounding this material, maybe your mind's wandering a little bit. In the background, it's there, it's available, and you can have, it's like falling back and knowing there's something always there to catch you. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you both. So let's see. Bijan, do you want to go ahead? And then I think Sairaj is next after Bijan. Go for it, Bijan, if you still want to.
Thank you so much, Rick, for doing this talk as well. I have a question about sort of the conceptualizing. Oftentimes in Buddhism, they talk about don't get caught up in the story of your life or things like that. And I've been doing a lot of Vipassana, like body scanning practice recently. And I feel like I even have a story about my own body that is just really difficult. Rather than feeling like my elbow or feeling my hands, I have an idea of what the hands look like in my mind, and then I'm feeling that idea in a sense, or that's what it kind of feels like. And if I try to like move towards the actual feeling, it's almost like I'm not used to it, and so it like comes back more to the conceptualization. Yeah. So I'm not sure, like, if this makes sense. I was wondering, like, if you have any advice, or like either like what's happening neurologically when we sort of tell ourselves even stories about how our own body looks like or how it feels like, versus like actually feeling the body or things like that.
Well, if I'd like to ask you a question first, what's your purpose or aim or longing related to doing body scans?
Right. So I started body scanning actually due to sort of historically, after finishing my own PhD, just feeling very burned out and actually feeling very disconnected from most things, I would say, or very much feeling like most things are overwhelming. Yeah. And like I'd rather ignore them. And so body scanning as a way to start not just reconnecting with like myself, I thought that was like a good place to start, but just Vipassana in general, which is about increasing awareness and more connection with the world, other people, surroundings. So
yeah. When you're scanning your body, are you naming the parts?
Yeah. So there's really much, I try to do it very systematically, like starting at the top of the head, like naming top of the head, eyebrows, nose, like cheeks, mouth, things like that.
Yeah. So let's see, there are lots of different instructions in different traditions of all kinds, including in subdivided traditions in just one tradition, such as Buddhism. And I'm not framing what I'm saying here as speaking against any particular instruction you've received, but I'm just trying to taking it on its own merits as I understand it, given what you're saying. So, first of all, I think there may well be some people who are freed up by doing an intensive noting practice. And I've known teachers of mine that I respect a lot who got a lot of value out of a noting practice, including noting different what's occurring in the streaming of consciousness, or other kinds of that, such as noting body parts in a very systematic kind of way. Now, it is certainly true neurologically that the simple act of a kind of a bare bones descriptive noting of an emotional reaction, such as frozen, outraged, lustful, just the noting of that reduces activity in the amygdala, which is the alarm bell of the brain, among other functions. It's a kind of a salience detector of what matters. So it kind of calms it down to note it. And noting tends to increase activity in regulatory executive prefrontal regions of the brain. So in that sense, it can be kind of helpful briefly to just name, oh, angry, hurt, imagery of being in fourth grade, picked last yet again for baseball, because for me, I was very young in school and I was routinely picked last in PE classes because I was a year and a half or more younger than most other people. So, that's helpful. That said, noting is going to engage verbal activity. And a lot about practice is about disengaging verbal activity. And also a lot of practice operationally is about reducing to neurologize it, to operationalize it neurologically. A lot of practice, meditative practice, is about reducing cortical activity in the midline, the frontal regions of which are task-oriented, the rearward regions of which are involved in the so-called default mode network, and spreading somewhat to the side. And when this midline cortex is activated, there's a lot of mental time travel into the future or the past, not that much present moment awareness. There's also a lot of selfing. It's kind of saturated with self-references, self-related representations. And there tends to be a fair amount of craving, a fair amount of drivenness in midline activity. There's a place for it, but there's a lot of trouble there, in particular going into the ruminator. And a lot of that midline activity is verbally saturated, and verbal activity tends to engage midline activity. On the other hand, when we do practices of different kinds that quiet midline activity, and in particular, they tend to activate circuits in the right hemisphere for right-handed people, which have to do with Gestalt, holistic processing in the present with the suchness of things as they are, with little conceptualization or verbal activity, right? I'm kind of describing general features of much meditative practice, which operationally basically is to reduce midline activation and increase lateral network activation, which brings us into the present with much less sense of self, much less sense of something missing, something wrong, and a much greater sense of the whole, which is helpful in all kinds of ways, including because the structure of almost all suffering is parts struggling with parts. Right? A part of us wants something that's a different part that we can't have, in effect. So when you get more into a sense of whole, suffering inherently starts dialing down. So for all those reasons, not to speak against anything in particular, I'm a little leery of the verbal, particularly for someone like you who's so trained like I am in verbal activity. I have an overactive verbal module. I don't want to feed that beast any more than I have to, especially in my meditative practice. And especially like I'm hearing that you're tired. You're tired of thinking. You're tired of labeling. You're tired of conceptualizing, and would be really, probably balanced maybe by resting more in a sense of the nonverbal, in not knowing, don't know mind, kind of an openness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of what I'm hearing here. So I would sort of wonder about that. Now, finishing here, if you're just, on the other hand, especially for someone who's been doing something pretty heady like a dissertation and so on, developing more sensory awareness, that's a great training to be able to really, literally, I'm just doing it right now, experience like the first joint of the pinky finger of the left hand. Right? Can you bring awareness there? Okay, great. Can you bring awareness to your right big toe? Okay, good. Being able to do that, I'm bouncing around the whole body, and you actually might want to bounce around the body. Can you feel the inner thighs, moving from knee all the way to the hips, to the groin? Yeah, body awareness is great, but adding verbalization to it, I guess I don't know. I don't know about that. And last one, being able to get a sense of your body as a whole. note that when we're noting, we're going part to part to part to part. That's kind of helpful if you want to, in effect, deconstruct the body as a doorway to broader deconstructions that take us into emptiness. And, a sense that things are existing, but they're foamy and insubstantial and ownerless rather than brick-like. They're more like clouds than bricks. Okay, great. But beyond that, you might like to do this. Play around as you breathe. Here's a really cool practice I'll leave you with, right now. 3 breaths. You can do it right now. Breathing while feeling your chest as a whole. Bingo. You can feel a shift of consciousness. When we go into the awareness of the field of sensation as a whole, in which many sensations are occurring, but we're moving into the whole, and you can expand that to your whole body. I think that for those of you that know this, the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta talks about this progression, and the 3rd or 4th step involves a sense of the whole body of breath. And people have argued about what in the world those words mean, but to get a sense of your whole body as you breathe, including your whole body, that might be very interesting for you. It's been very interesting for me. I also, in the other 2 breaths of the 3 breath practice, do breathing while feeling caring and breathing while feeling cared about. And those 3 breaths, even just offering it to other people, are completely secular. And wow, a lot of power in them. You could take more than a single breath with each one as you get better at it. And you can also do 3 in a row, but that's a good practice.
Thank you so much. That is really, that already is very good advice of how to move away from the more verbal aspects and still keeping it body and sensation centered. And I'm very much looking forward to trying it out next time. Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Thanks, Bijan. Thanks, Rick. So I misspoke. I accidentally pulled a little bit of a La La Land at the Oscars situation here. I'm sorry, Sairaj. You weren't right up next on the queue, but I said you were. I'm so sorry. But my hope is maybe we can knock out 2 if Rick's game before we go. Okay, so here's the question, which was sent to me to read on their behalf, and then we'll go to Sairaj. Okay. Dear Rick, thank you for your presence and wisdom here. You mentioned that while most people can have positive experiences, they often forget to, quote, internalize, end quote, the positive states into positive traits. You also mentioned that modern science can help facilitate that second step. Can you please provide concrete examples of how third-person science can help us convert positive states into positive traits?
Oh, well, you're in my wheelhouse here, so I've got to be self-regulating that I don't just rattle on forever.
I can help if need be.
Yeah. Well, I think I could say it like this. So my suggestion is on my website, lots and lots of freely offered resources, including a TEDx talk and other things, in which I present the fundamental, I think, process of self-directed neuroplasticity, of self-directed learning, in which we're trying to get the most out of the experiences we're having. And I use the rubric HEAL, H-E-A-L. So I'll just walk through that really quickly. So in the 2-stage process of any kind of change for the better, including healing and releasing things, it's a 2-stage process in which first we begin with an experience that's beneficial of some kind, including an experience of release. I'll pick something simple. Let's talk about building up the trait of self-compassion, let's say. So we start with an experience of self-compassion or a related factor, such as the ability to have empathy in general, including empathy for oneself, or the feeling of compassion in general, and in particular, compassion for oneself. We begin with an experience. Now we've got a state. We've got the song playing. How do we record it in the inner iPod? Then we move from having an experience, either because it's already occurring and we want to help it sink in, or we deliberately create it. Either way, that song is playing in the inner iPod. We're having that experience. It's activated. Now, in the second stage, how do we install it? And here I make a distinction, grounded in science, between what I call enriching and absorbing. I'm moving through the HEAL acronym. Now I'm at the E and A, enriching and absorbing. Enriching essentially means in your mind having a big, intense, sustained experience, which in your brain, the neural correlates of consciousness, means an intense, sustained, distributed, highly active pattern of neural activation. That is the basis of the experience as we enrich it. And then in terms of absorbing, it means helping the machinery of memory become increasingly sensitive. So that's what it means neurologically, sensitizing the machinery of memory so that the current pattern of activation has the best chance of leading to a lasting change in neural structure and function. And experientially, in the mind, subjectively, absorbing feels like receiving something good into yourself while recognizing what is rewarding about it, what is enjoyable about it. Okay, that's the HEA, and the optional step in the HEAL frame link involves holding both positive and negative in the mind at once. Mindfulness of pain is a form of linking. The pain, let's say, is so-called negative, it's painful, called potentially harmful. In mindful spacious awareness, that's what's also present, and that's positive, the undisturbable field of awareness in which disturbing experiences are occurring. That's a form of linking. Compassion is a form of linking. There's an awareness of sorrow with caring and benevolence, empathy, and a wish to help if one can. All right. So that's the fundamental structure. Neurologically, there's distributed research in non-human animal studies and elsewhere that 8 factors, 5 for enriching, 3 for absorbing, have evidence for them. And I've recently pulled this together into a paper that's been submitted and it's awaiting peer review and in the Journal of Positive Psychology, blah, blah. So it's not yet published, but I can tell you, here we go. You want to help yourself grow to the max from anything you're experiencing, including in meditation. First, so under enriching, let's suppose while meditating, you're having a sense of self-compassion, okay? Extend the duration of the experience. The longer the neurons are firing, the more they'll be wiring. Second, and you don't need to do all 5 or even 8. Anyone is good, more is better. Second, intensify the experience. Turn up the volume, as it were. Really get into, self-compassion. Really feel it. The more intensely the neurons are firing, the more they're going to tend to wire together. And every single thing I'm saying here, has a paper behind it of some kind. Third, try to feel it in your body and bring more qualities of experience to it. Add a thought to a sensation. Add a sensation to a thought. Be aware of wholesome wants. Bring to bear action in your body. Shift your bodily pose. In other words, what does it feel like in your body? What's the posture you adopt when you're having self-compassion? Right? For example, these will all tend to increase the neural traces left behind. Fourth, novelty. The brain is a big novelty detector. What is fresh or new in this experience of self-compassion? Or what could you explore? Or how could you bring an attitude of don't know mind to the self-compassion or the eyes of a child? Suzuki Roshi put it, he said, in the beginner's mind are many possibilities, and the expert's mind are only a few. So beginner's mind, right? Novelty, that's the fourth factor under the heading of enriching. And then fifth, personal relevance, salience. Why would it be helpful to me to grow the trait of self-compassion? Why is this experience of self-compassion important to me, given how much I was criticized as a kid, or given how hard I am on myself, or given how my partner, I know they love me, but man, they're judgmental, or I'm in a career or a job that people are very critical, or there's high pressure, or there's a lot of perfectionism. Why would self-compassion be relevant to me? Those are 5 major factors, that all of which heighten neuroplastic change. right? Under enriching. And then last for absorbing, 3, intending. Intend to receive the experience into oneself. Give it to yourself. Let yourself be changed a little by it. Let it kind of give yourself over to it. As we intend to gain from certain experiences, that primes memory-making systems. It makes them more efficient and mobilizes them. A sense that you're receiving it into your body. It might feel like water coming into a sponge, like warmth coming into a t-shirt on a hot day. It might feel like it's sifting, the experience is sifting down into you like a gentle rain. Pick your metaphor. Children, I talk about putting a jewel in the treasure chest of the heart. You know, there's a sensing of internalization. That too tends to heighten receptivity. And then last, focus on what's rewarding about it. This is the third factor under the heading of absorbing, because as the sense of reward, what's enjoyable or meaningful in the experience increases, so does the activity of dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain. And as that activity increases in the brain gets sensitized to learning from, to get sensitized to valuing the experience of the time and protecting it as it gradually gets consolidated into long-term storage. So that was a long answer. You don't need to do all of it. What I find for a lot of people is that if while you're practicing formally or informally in everyday life, something lands that you think to yourself, this one matters, like you're reading a little passage in a book, or your partner says something to you and you want to get it the first time, not the 10th time, whatever it might be. I've done this thousands of times now over many years. It's like you let it come into you. You let yourself shift so that increasingly you are this way. And to relate it to practice, there's a traditional saying that the mind takes its shape from what it routinely rests upon, for better or worse. The brain takes its shape from neurons that fire together, wire together, for better or worse. And we're primed and we're designed through evolution to particularly take our shape from negative experiences. Brain is like Velcro for bad experiences, but like Teflon for positive ones. So, when we really rest our mind and we keep resting it on what's wholesome and beneficial and skillful and reassuring and wise, that gradually becomes our own nature. And to me, the essence of practice, to finish, whether it's in formal meditation or just everyday life, is as best one can to rest one's mind upon what calls to one's heart, right? And to, in that way, love it into being.
Thanks, Rick. So before we take Sairaj's question, which we are going to do, if that's cool with you, Rick. Okay, fantastic. So just in case people have to jet, since we're getting close to time, I do want to just take a moment before the final question to just reiterate a few things. One, if you want to hang out with us, go to sitheads.com, sit-heads, to come to more fantastic events like this. Next, we've got David Leonard, who's a fantastic sort of hidden yogi, a wonderful Vipassana teacher, who was a monk for, I think, 8 years, did something like 3.5 years of retreat. I think it's reverse, 8 years of retreat, 3.5 years as a monk. After that, we've got a little known meditation teacher, but I hear she's good. Her name is Sharon Salzberg. She'll be joining us. Bill and Susan Morgan will be coming to hang out with us in May. They're a wonderful married couple with deep, deep, deep practice. They did a 4-year silent meditation retreat together. They're incredible. I like them a lot. And the wonderful Martine Batchelor will be joining us in May as well. She spent, I think, 10 years as a nun in the Korean Son tradition, the Korean Zen tradition, essentially. An expert in a few different things, including Hwa-du, the form of sort of self-questioning that we often think of not quite correctly as koan practice. So we could ask her about that. All right, so that's happening. If you want to join the Slack, I'm going to put the link in the chat. If you want to offer Donna to Rick, which I encourage you to do, because this was a wonderful, wonderful conversation, I'm about to put that again in the chat. And then the last thing, which I forgot to mention earlier, is that if you struggle to maintain a daily meditation practice, which I know is a very difficult thing, we offer a service, it's free like everything we do, called Sitting Circles, where based on when you like to sit, we will match you with a small group of other people to commit to sit together on video chat every weekday at a set time that you decide on every weekday. So it is essentially gym buddies for your meditation practice to help you stay accountable. I am in a sitting circle. It is the reason why I have essentially, not counting illness, not skipped a day since something like June. It has made all the difference for me. So I'm going to include a link for Sitting Circles as well. I'm putting all of that in the chat right now. And then I'm going to say this again at the end, but thank you to all of you, and especially to Dr. Rick Hanson. Now, if we can, squeak out an answer to Sairaj. Sairaj, do you want to unmute and go for it? And thank you to everyone who came and who is hanging out. Please keep hanging out because every question was great. Every answer was great. And I'm sure this one will be too. Sairaj, let her rip if you want to.
Thank you, Rick, for doing this. And thank you, John, for organizing this. This is my first time here in the Sit-Ups Club. And I am very grateful for all of this. So I would keep it really brief. So my questions, Rick, I've seen you, I have kind of heard you speaking in Greater Good Science Center websites on science and the science behind meditation and stuff like that. And also I've listened to one of your podcasts, Being Well.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to ask, so one of the things that I'm working is kind of trying to change my own behaviors, and habit change is something that I am kind of struggling with.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if there is any science behind, how meditation is correlated with habit change, and does meditation help with it, or what kind of impact that might have on habit change? I'm just curious if you've come across any research on that area.
Really interesting. It makes me think of the Chogyam Trungpa, I think, was once asked, what reincarnates, right? What is reborn? And he said, your bad habits. So anyway, without putting you on the spot, Sairaj, would you be willing to say or give an example of a kind of habit, as it were, you're trying to disengage from? Or more positively, what are you trying to stabilize in yourself?
Yeah, to give an example. So I love going on long walks, and I feel really good after that. But if I'm in the middle of doing something and then I schedule that I need to go for a long walk at 7 p.m. So when the time comes, I kind of postpone it, and it's before I really realize it's an hour or a couple of hours, and then it's no more, it's no more possible to go, and it's too late to go properly. So these are some of the things. This is one example, and this goes to different areas of my life as well. So I feel like I'm missing out on some of the good experiences. If I could change some of the behaviors, I could, significantly improve the quality of my life. So I'm curious how meditation, fits into this.
Right. Okay. So your specific question, there's a lot of research on how meditation can be helpful in a variety of ways, which basically involve doing or having less and less of something that's burdensome, problematic, harmful, painful, and so forth. Less and less of that, and more of something good. And that's kind of a general statement. Specifically here, a couple quick things that I think are general to just about anything. First, what I'm hearing you say is that there's a relative lack of what's called executive function when you're just sort of carried along, in some activity you're doing. And one of the things that meditation is most known for is it helps to increase executive function, the capacity for what's called metacognition or meta-awareness, where you're aware, you can think about your own thinking. You can step back from the movie and you can notice, here I am banging away on this thing, and I'm basically I'm preventing the opportunity to go for a walk later tonight because it's going to get too late. Hold the horses here. My dad grew up on a ranch, so I know that expression, hold the horses here. I need to stop what I'm doing here and value something else as more important to me for a variety of reasons. And I'm reminded of the Buddhist teaching that wisdom is choosing a greater happiness over a lesser happiness. It's not choosing happiness over suffering. That's easy. It's choosing a greater happiness over a lesser happiness. It's choosing, it's acknowledging the lesser happiness in what you're doing, the clock is ticking. Yeah, it's rewarding. Yeah, it's meaningful. Yeah, maybe it's interesting in some ways, but the good is crowding out the great, right? The good of the lesser happiness is crowding out the higher happiness. And executive functions really help to see that and call time out. And that would be my suggestion for you. Use your executive functions to call time out. And then as the seconds and then minutes tick by, when you're no longer caught up in that habitual lesser happiness activity, your executive functions will become increasingly mobilized and then help you to make a choice and start moving down a different road. So that would be the first thing. And then second, the more that we're drawn toward the higher happiness, the more we naturally lean in that direction. A Buddhist term for that is inclining the mind. And you can use meditation in general, and you can use other methods that are not so meditative to deliberately in your before doing it, the Buddha recommended this, before doing it, while doing it, and after doing it, really focus on the rewards of doing what you want to encourage. The good feeling in your body of that long walk, the quieting, the way when you come back you feel better, the way maybe other people appreciate it when you come back from a walk and you're more chilled out and heart's more open, whatever. Imagine those rewards in a very rich, felt way associated in your mind with going for a walk. That's before doing it. Then while doing it, also highlight the sense of reward that's directly associated with the behavior you want to encourage. This is a kind of sophisticated form of behaviorism, operant conditioning, but it works, right? We're pairing a reward to a behavior we want to encourage. And then afterward, when you reflect on it, then too, let it really sink in. Oh, doing this thing, the walk, felt really good. It's really wonderful. I really want to do more and more of it. And in that way, then with increasingly, you'll be inclining your mind, to use that traditional phrase, in the direction you want to encourage. And you can do that inclining when you're meditating, if you want to take a little time to, motivate yourself. That's what we're talking about here, motivation to go for that walk, but particularly in life in general. And to highlight that as a general principle, maybe as we finish here, the more that we can appreciate the juiciness, the peacefulness, the freedom, the love, the joy in those qualities that we're cultivating in our contemplative practice, the more we will be inclined in that direction. And, recognizing and feeling and kind of marinating in those juicy, rewarding aspects are very skillful means as we practice. And it's important to not push them away based on a kind of grim, dour, glum, attitude that if I'm not miserable, I'm not really meditating properly. Yeah. Thank you.
So much, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sairaj. Thanks for being patient.
No worries. Thank you very much.
All right. So,
Alrighty.
So that takes us to the end. Thanks so much, everyone who hung out with us. Rick, what can I say? That was great.
I was okay. I recognize some people here. Hello, Tim, and some others. And I want to say what an honor. And when you gave that lineup of your future teachers, you know, Martine, other people, whoa, Sharon, what an honor to be, you know, with you all. And what a joy too, to talk about practice with each other.
It's our pleasure to have you. And I hope I'll be able to lure you back. We'll be able to lure you back at some point to spend time with us again.
Yeah, great. Well, blessings and bows to all of you. Thank you.
Be well, Rick. Thank you. Everybody else, take care. Thank you so much. Have a good one, everybody. And I hope to see you all again soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.